All right, John, I want to start with Pete Carroll, who is now going to be the next head coach for the Las Vegas Raiders. This one, to me, is one of those situations where you look at both sides, which is, wow, that's a great hire. Pete Carroll, Super Bowl winning coach. He is a culture setter. He has completely set the tone every destination that he has taken over. But he's going to be 74. He's 73 right now. He's going to be 74 in September. I find myself reserving judgment here because the Raiders are not ready to win right this second. The Raiders are not in this position where he was possibly in the mix for the Bears job, where the Bears could be a playoff team next year. They've got the quarterback. They've got the receivers. They got a good defense. You just need a little bit more, and they got the money to spend. The Raiders are a shit show. Not trying to be super negative Raider fans. I think you guys acknowledge that this team right now needs work. And you're going to have to figure out who's the quarterback. It's going to take a lot of time, at least 3 years, just like when he started out in Seattle, before the gears started turning. You're telling me a 77-year-old Pete Carroll isn't going to be dozing off at 10 p.m. when he needs to be up and at it and doing film breakdowns and leading meetings? I don't get that side of it.
Look, I love Pete Carroll. I think he's a fun coach. He's energizing, and he was great for the NFL with Seattle. This move feels like all of the Raiders execs were just in a meeting, chopping it up. They had their feet on the table like, should we give Pete a call? You think he'd take our call?
What about Pete Carroll?
Might as well, right? Like he's not doing anything. So, you know what? If that's how it went down, I have to assume it did. He's a professional coach. He's a coach that has had winning teams. He's won a Super Bowl semi-recently. Like on paper, it works. I don't mind. I typically don't mind the age thing. Older coaches, they've been around ball a lot, and older coaches that have won in the modern era, I like that also. But it feels like you may have well just kept Pierce for another year if we're going to pull this. And
I don't agree with that part. I don't agree with that part.
I liked Antonio Pierce as a head coach. I really did. I thought he had a great mentality for that team, and the Raiders drafted poorly for players that would work in his system and the tone and culture he tried to set in Vegas. I just don't. This is like so Raiders, so lateral. It's a name you know. It's Darius Hayward-Bay. This is what it feels like to me.
Okay. The angle that you're taking on it, I don't agree with this part. I don't agree with what you're saying here because it is a good hire in a vacuum.
Yes.
Pete Carroll is the right coach for a team that hasn't got the head coaching hire right, except when they had Gruden and then they had to fire him for reasons. They need somebody who is going to reset the floor. Reset the foundation, place them in a position where they can build success. I don't think that it was one of those like, oh, here's a name, he's washed, any of those things. He's still a good coach. And kind of like what you're saying, age doesn't impact how he's going to be able to shape this franchise. But where I just really come into not understanding it is needing this much change. What is going to happen? In a few years, there's no way that he is going to coach into his 80s. There's no way he's going to coach until 78. This is a multi-year process. The thing that I would like to discover, and as this is being reacted to an hour after the signing, part of me kind of wonders, is there some sort of a succession plan? Is there a coordinator that he views as, I think that he'll end up taking over? Because at least with Bill Belichick, it was deliberate. Hire me, and then my son's going to take over. He took that job, and it wasn't talked about enough that Steve Belichick will be the next head coach of UNC. He was setting up his son to succeed.
He did the same thing in New England with Mayo.
Well, right. Well, and with Mayo, and then at one point when we thought he was going to retire sooner, there was always the speculation that McDaniels would eventually be the guy who took over. There was always some sort of a plan. I need to know who is that guy. Who's going to take over eventually when he decides to retire? Because starting from scratch would be a total S show.
I don't like the succession plan. I don't like this guy's definitely going to be at this position in so-and-so number of years. Football is way too fluid of a sport, and it's way too big to be handled like that, in my opinion. Every year, if you are deciding we need a coach, that means you do start from scratch and you do a full no rock unturned search for who it may be and who is the best fit. I do not like, hey, this is going to be our guy. It doesn't make sense to me.
Well, but the intention here is Pete Carroll fixes the culture. Okay, he fixes the culture, but by the time it's fixed, it's time to go sit on a beach in Cancun.
I think you're the broad point that you're making is great. He needs to have a court. He needs to have.
What's the next plan?
Surround himself with a defensive coordinator or an offensive coordinator that could step in 3 years. But this guaranteed succession, that aspect, that's also narrow focusing on my end. A 4-year option will not be taken by Pete Carroll. It just is not going to be in the cards. He's always been a high energy guy, but that last year in Seattle, it felt like even then the age was being shown just a little bit. And this is gum chomping Pete Carroll on the sideline, throwing the ball around, always smiling. Mm-hmm. It felt a little bit different in that last year where he didn't have that same pep and enthusiasm to go about coaching the Seattle team.
To his defense, though, I don't blame for that Seattle situation ending the way that it did, because it still was reflective of being a Pete Carroll team where they were competitive. They didn't completely fall off the map where they were just donezo. They had to figure out who the next quarterback was. Geno has shown some positive signs, and he's been good in spurts. We all know, though, that there's a higher ceiling there for a different quarterback to eventually take over. The way that they were able to be so consistently competitive that when he was gone and then this past year they were still in the mix for the playoffs, like that I think is a sign of his impact. I just need to know, and it doesn't even need to be somebody on staff, like, is this short-sighted that it's like, okay, let's just get him in the building, then we'll figure it out. I would hope that this is intentional enough to think, what is the next step after this? Because this thing has a much shorter runway than if we were hiring a 38-year-old Ben Johnson that we would hope is going to be here for the next 15 years if everything goes according to plan.
This one's also a little prickly to me because if you're going to get Pete Carroll, 73-year-old Pete Carroll, you might as well get 73-year-old Bill Belichick. You might as well.
They already tried to do that.
They should have gone. They should have gone.
Belichick 73.
Yeah, they should have gone full Monty on Belichick then. If we're going to go Pete Carroll, because
we don't know for sure that they didn't try to. It seems like Tom had some intentionality there.
I think there should have been a stronger intentionality then. He could have been pulled. I think if a real plan and real big money was thrown at Belichick, he could have been swayed out of UNC.
I still really think the whole setting up Steve for a job was the priority here, because I think that he's smart enough to have known that if he just kind of waited, he probably would have gotten the situation that Pete just got. If you ask anyone and their mother, would you rather have Pete Carroll or Bill Belichick? They're all going to say,
right,
Bill Belichick. He's smart enough to understand that.